What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to go through every single week 3 matchup, every single fantasy relevant running back, and go through and call them either starts, RB2 streamers, or sits. I'm bringing you guys this video a day early because I do want a little bit more of a grace period because we're going to cover the Thursday night games today. So when I post this video on Thursdays and there's only like, I guess, 3 to 5 hours of time before the Thursday night kickoff, it almost feels like the video loses its shelf life. Kind of getting into, the nitty gritty of content creation there, but we're going to start doing these on Wednesdays, see how they do, see how you guys like the new schedule. Regardless, we have a lot to get into today. We're not going to waste any time. If you enjoy the video at any point, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
Now, before we get into the Thursday night game, if you guys want a little more precise view at how I view this week's slate, check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I come out every week with my weekly rankings so you know which running backs I'm starting, right? If there's 2 starts at running back or 2 RB2 streamers, that way you know who I prefer when it comes down to the nitty-gritty. So if you want access to my weekly rankings, my Patreon-only live streams on Sunday, my rest of season rankings, my waiver wire article I come out with every week, that'll be on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be in the description, and it'll be down below in the comments. So our first matchup here is an absolute stinker after we've been just spoiled with these Thursday night matchups. We have the Steelers on the road as 5.5-point underdogs to the Browns. We have a 38.5-point over-under. If I remember correctly, I think that's the lowest over-under we've seen this season so far. It's going to be an ugly game, low-scoring game. Now, when we talk about the running backs, I just want to say it at the top here because we do have, I want to say like 3/4 of the people who watch these videos are not subscribed or they're new viewers. So I want to make sure that I'm not leaving those guys out. In these videos, we break them down into starts, sits, and then we have an in-between of RB2 streamers. I don't just want to go through and talk about, the top 25 running backs are starts and the rest of them are sits. I want a little bit of a middle ground because on this channel, I preached Hero RB so much this offseason where we punt RB2. So in a lot of my lineups, you'll see guys that are maybe ranked like RB33, RB35 in my rankings still going into my lineup. So that's the spot for those guys. RB2 streamers, guys who are somewhere between a start, between a sit, that you can put in your RB2 spot on those Hero RB teams. Now, with the Steelers running backs, Najee Harris is trending towards RB2 streamer territory, but I have him listed as a start here. And at this point, if you drafted Najee Harris in the top 2 rounds, you have no choice but to start him. But he does feel more like Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery than the Najee Harris we had last year, where he was at 18.7 expected points per game last year. That's just how many points is he expected to score based off of his volume alone. This year, that's now down to 14.9. So he goes from being a difference maker off of volume alone in that, 18 point per game area to being a 15 point per game guy with no efficiency that sort of looks like, again, a mid-range RB2 in that Jacobs-Montgomery role. On the positive side, he did see 6 targets last week after only seeing 2 in week 1, so he's getting a little bit more involved in the passing game, and as 5.5-point underdogs, he should give you at least a nice PPR floor. Again, though, you're probably looking somewhere in the area of 15 points. Then we have Jaylen Warren, who I'll mention here because he was a hot waiver wire ad last week. I know some people wanted me to mention hot waiver wire ads, which I'll try and do a better job of doing moving forward, but Jaylen Warren only saw 5 opportunities last week. He's a stash for now. You don't play him unless if Najee Harris is hurt. Then on the Browns side of things, I would call the Steelers' run defense a neutral matchup. They're not that great against the run. Chubb now has back-to-back games over 100 rushing yards. They're home favorites. He should be in play for 100 yards again. I don't think you can really bank on him having 3 touchdowns again, but he's going to be a touchdown-dependent back-end RB1 in this game. Then we have Kareem Hunt, who, even though he had a quieter week last week than he had in week 1, he still saw 13 carries to Nick Chubb 17. He's very much still involved in this offense. I have him as a start and a back-end RB2 in a light matchup this week, which then brings us to the 1 p.m. games on Sunday. We have the Ravens on the road at the Patriots as 3-point favorites. The over-under is 43.5, and I kind of like the over in this game. 43.5 feels really low for a Ravens team that's first in offensive DVOA. The Patriots are 11th. Both teams are top 2 in no huddle percentage in neutral game scripts. They're both going to be playing a little bit quicker than you would expect from these teams. Patriots games have been low scoring this season, but the Ravens' pass offense has been so amazing, just finding huge splash plays down the field. I think this game might lend itself to a shootout, or at least the Ravens putting up like 30, 40 points and the Patriots trailing from behind, in that range of 17 to 20 area. Now, when we talk about the Ravens running backs, the guy up top is J.K. Dobbins. There's a chance that Dobbins is healthy for this game. The Ravens have been 10th in pass rate over expected, so they've been passing a lot without him. It wouldn't shock me if they tried to revert back to their normal self of running the ball a ton once J.K. Dobbins is healthy, but I'd be shocked if the Ravens had an overnight identity change in Dobbins' first game back. Now, this running back room has been super ugly without Dobbins. Last week, we saw a three-way split between Kenyon Drake, Mike Davis, Justice Hill, all of them at 6 touches or less. So there's a clear runway for J.K. Dobbins once he comes back here. The only issue for me is that he's listed as week to week. There's reports that maybe he suffered a setback. It seems like he's in play to play this week, but even if he is, I want to be sitting him if I can help it. He's right on that border of an RB2 streamer. If you're desperate, looking at like Tyler Algier, Jordan Mason, go Dobbins in that situation. But until he's healthy and we at least just see a week of him playing football on Sunday, I don't want him in my lineup if I can help it. Now, we talked about the three-way split of the rest of these Ravens running backs. Even if Dobbins can't go, none of these running backs had over 6 opportunities last week. You're not starting or even streaming any of these Ravens running backs not named J.K. Dobbins. On the other side, instead of a 3-way committee, we have a 2-way committee with these Patriots running backs. And I would call both Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson RB2 streamers this week. Versus a Ravens run defense, I would consider a neutral matchup. Now, with Ty Montgomery gone, these running backs now have great roles. Where Ramondre Stevenson played on 60% of the snaps, had an elite 62% route rate. We want 60% or more of the routes. That gets you into the Aaron Jones area, the Austin Eckler area. And this is going to be a much different game script where they come from beating the Steelers in a low-scoring game to playing against the Ravens this week. Should be trailing, should have to throw the ball a little bit more here, trying to keep up with the Ravens passing offense. And in that scenario, I do like Ramondre Stevenson to be in that RB30 area. I also like Damian Harris. He led the backfield in carries last week as this grinder, leading all of the goal line looks as well. I think both guys have their own role in this offense. They're both RB2 streamers in that RB30 area for me. Then we have an AFC East matchup here. The Bills are 5.5-point favorites on the road versus the Dolphins in the highest over-under of this week's slate at 53.5. Neither of these teams are super high-paced teams where they've both been bottom 5 in seconds per snap in neutral game scripts, and they've both been under 10% no-huddle rate in neutral game scripts, but they both have top 5 scoring offenses averaging 30-plus points per game with top 3 pass rates over expectation. There shouldn't be a ton of plays, but if this game does shoot out, they're going to have to push the tempo a little bit more. And on top of that, both of these offenses are going to be super efficient scoring the ball. On the Bills side of things, we have Devin Singletary, who still hasn't scored double-digit points in fantasy, but his usage is solid. He saw 65% of the snaps last week, 55% of the carries, a 65% route participation, so like an elite route participation. He's not a great target earner like an Eckler or an Aaron Jones, but it's at least interesting that he's out there in the passing game as pretty much their true number 1 or 1A in this backfield. The only issue is that Miami is kind of a pass funnel here, where they have the 7th best rush DVOA defense, but the 31st pass DVOA defense. So the Bills should pass the ball at will here. But with this high of an over-under at 53.5, again, you're pretty much playing Singletary as an RB2 streamer. He's going to be in play for 10-plus touches and possibly a touchdown, just given how high the point total is in this game. Now, I would have Zach Moss and James Cook as sits here. Zach Moss had 6 targets in week 1. It looked like maybe he'd be kind of in a satellite back role. Not the case this week. Only had 1 target. Both Bills running backs had 5 touches or less while the starters were in. Then eventually it was garbage time. James Cook got some more touches. But before then, neither of them are featured in this offense. Neither of them are startable for now. Then on the Dolphins side of things, we have what might be our first Chase Edmonds game, where instead of them beating the Steelers or beating the Patriots and then beating the Ravens last week, I guess they were trailing last week, But they're 5.5-point underdogs to the Bills. They're going to be passing the ball a ton. The only issue is that even though I would call Edmonds the pass-catching back on this team, he was out there for all of the 2-minute drill, for all the long down and distance stuff, but Raheem Mostert out-targeted and ran more routes than Edmonds last week. Now, that's only a one-game sample. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here as an RB2 streamer. If targets don't go to Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, the next man up is Chase Edmonds. I would call him, again, an RB2 streamer in a rough matchup versus the best defense in the league that just held Derrick Henry to 8.5 points. You're hoping for some PPR points. I would have him right in that RB 30-ish area. And then we have Raheem Mostert, and I would say he's right on the fringe of about RB 40. He's just barely not an RB2 streamer. The reason for that is this is a tough matchup for him where the Bills are the third toughest rush DVOA defense. They're allowing the fourth least fantasy points to opposing running backs. This is a game that they're going to trail against a tough defensive front. It's just not the game script for Raheem Mostert. Next, we go from a game with a 53.5-point over-under all the way to a game with a 40.5-point over-under. Huge downgrade. The Saints on the road as 3-point favorites to the Panthers. Over-under of 40.5. The Panthers should play fast from behind in this game, but I'm not sure it'll matter for fantasy points. Both of these teams are pretty average across the board. I think there's going to be a lot of plays on the Panther side of the ball, but I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of yards or a lot of scoring from them. I think this line's probably right where the Saints just win an ugly game on the road. Nobody really does much outside of the studs in this game. And when we talk about the Saints running backs, I have Kamara as a start if he's active. He should be ready to play either this week or next week. If he's healthy, he'll see the majority of the touches against a Panthers rush D that is allowing the 10th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Or he's out, and then you have Mark Ingram. And even then, I wouldn't have Ingram as a start. I wouldn't even have Ingram as an RB2 streamer if Kamara is out. He still only saw 6.3 points on like 35% of the snaps last week, even with Alvin Kamara out. At this point, if Kamara is in, Mark Ingram is cuttable. If Kamara is out, Ingram is like a desperation RB 45, RB 40-ish type play. And then we have the Panthers side of the ball. Christian McCaffrey's there. Of course, you're still starting him. I know that he hasn't been everything we've wanted in fantasy so far. He's hovering around like 15 points per game or hovering around 15 points per game. He crossed 100 rushing yards last week. He's still seeing a ton of usage. I think he's going to pop off for his first 20-plus, 25-plus point game very soon here. And as much as the Saints have been a strong defense recently against the run, they've been middle of the road recently. They're only like 19th in rush defense DVOA. I like McCaffrey in a matchup here where they should be down. They should have to pass him the ball more than they have recently as a top 5 play at running back. Next, we have the Chiefs as 6.5-point favorites on the road versus the Colts, and over under 49.5. I love the Chiefs to cover here. The Colts have been so bad. They are the worst offense in the NFL, averaging 10 points per game at this point. They got shut out by the Jaguars. They tied against the Texans. I think the Chiefs roll here by like double digits. I wouldn't be shocked if this minus 6.5 Chiefs line gets to like -9 by the time we get to Sunday. The Chiefs are going to have extra time to prepare after the Thursday night game. I think this could be ugly for the Colts yet again. Now, when we talk about the Chiefs running backs, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and at this point, you have to start him. Even if his usage is shaky, he's been the RB5 through 2 weeks, despite only averaging like 11 opportunities per game. But that's kind of the deal you signed up for, where the volume wouldn't really be there, but the efficiency would be because he's on the Chiefs. So this is a guy who handled most of between the tackle stuff. The Colts are a tough rushing D, ranking top 3 in rush D on PFF, top 3 on rush D per DVOA. But the game script is going to play itself into Clyde Edwards-Helaire's hands, where he's going to be the main guy between the tackles in a game that the Chiefs should win pretty handedly. Then we have Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco. I have them both as sits. McKinnon led all Chiefs running backs in snaps last week and in red zone touches, but he still only saw 6 touches, scored under 10 fantasy points. He's a pass-catching back on a team that is favored by 6.5 points. He's a sit for me for now. Same with Pacheco. He only played on 5 of 57 snaps last week. You can sit him pretty comfortably. Then you have the Colts. Of course, Jonathan Taylor's a start. He only had 10 touches last week for 7.3 points and an awful 24-0 game script. I think he'll bounce back a little bit here if the Colts can just make this slightly competitive. It's going to come down to whether or not Michael Pittman is going to play. We don't have that info yet, but The Chiefs aren't a great run defense by any means. They've allowed the 9th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Jonathan Taylor should bounce back. He's a pretty easy top 5 play at running back, even in a negative game script like this. And then we have Nyheim Hines here as an RB2 streamer, where I think if there was ever a week to fire up Nyheim Hines, it would be this week as underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs who are going on to play fast and pass the football. The Colts should trail for most of this game. They should be forced to play with tempo, pass the ball late, and that would lead you to a Nyheim Hines game this week. In PPR leagues, I think that he is a fine RB2 streamer right around that RB30 area, just given the matchup. Then we have what should be a fun matchup with the Lions on the road as 5.5-point underdogs to the Vikings, and over-under 52.5. That over-under is warranted. Two teams that you wouldn't have really said. I mean, the Vikings, sure, but the Lions, not really. The Lions have lended themselves to shootouts in these last 2 games. They lost 38-35 in week 1, and then they won 36-27. Both of those games very easily cleared. I want to say 60 in both of those games. Just a lot of points. And it should be a similar game script here in Minnesota, where the Vikings showed in week 1 that they could score. I think that the game against the Eagles last night, or it'll be 2 nights ago for you guys, you hate to see it. Kirk Cousins in primetime struggles, but I do think you can just chalk that up as a primetime Kirk Cousins game in a really tough environment in Philadelphia. So he's going to come back here at home against the Lions. This should be a game where both of these offenses score just fine. Now, the Lions side of the ball, when we talk about these running backs, DeAndre Swift is a must-start this week. Even in a game where he was hurt last week, he was still a 16.7-point guy, even on only 10 touches. We hope that the volume increases, but he's been so efficient within this offense that he's still a top 10 option against a Vikings rush defense that ranks 32nd in rush DVOA, regardless of his volume. Now, it's also important to note that despite the injury, Swift and Williams went back to a 50-50 split on the goal line. So in week 1, I believe it was like 5 goal line touches for Jamal Williams and like 1 for Swift. I want to say it was 2-2 last week. So that's something to note, where DeAndre Swift, he's getting all the passing down work and he's splitting the goal line work instead of being completely vultured by Jamal Williams. Now, speaking of Jamal Williams, he's seen 10 or more carries in each of his first 2 games this year. He's had at least half of the goal line looks in both of those games. So with so many points on the board here, with a 52.5-point over-under against a bad run defense in the Minnesota Vikings, I think that he's right on the fringe of an RB2 streamer. I would put him right around RB35. Now, on the Viking side, of course, we have Dalvin Cook up here. I know it's been ugly. I know he hasn't put up good numbers thus far, but he is in an absolute smash spot here. The usage has been elite. He had 80% of the backfield snaps and a 73% route participation. Remember, again, 60% plus is elite. So he is getting like almost Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones type route participation. He's the bell cow for what should be a really good offense moving forward. I think you can kind of just write off what happened on Monday night. He's in a game here that should have 50-plus points scored. They're favorites at home. Dalvin Cook, to me, is a top 3 play this week against a Detroit Lions defense that is very soft. Now, Alexander Mattison, of course, you're sitting him. He's just a handcuff for now. But if Dalvin Cook was to ever go down, Mattison, of course, is like a top 15 play. Now, the guys who the Vikings just got embarrassed to on Monday night, we have the Eagles as 6.5-point favorites riding high into Washington. This is a 49.5-point over-under. Both teams are top 5 in seconds per play in neutral game scripts. They're running fast, high-paced offenses. They're top 8 scoring offenses this far. Washington is 6th in pass rate over expected. Philly is 13th. These are teams who are going to pass the ball, play fast, especially with Washington trailing from behind. With the Eagles running backs, we have Miles Sanders up top, who is the RB12 through 2 weeks at this point. He's now hit 10-plus points in both of those games. He had 20 opportunities in week 2, 15 opportunities in week 1. He's going to be in a positive game script as 6.5-point favorites versus a Washington run defense that is allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. He is very easily a top 20 to 25 option at running back. Now, we're not starting any of these other Eagles running backs. Boston Scott has yet to see more than 5 opportunities in a given game, and as 6.5-point favorites, Gainwell won't be used in that passing down garbage time type role. Then we have the Washington running backs, where Antonio Gibson is a start for me, where similar to Miles Sanders, he is a top 12 running back on the season. He's seen 18 or more opportunities in both of his games so far. He's going to be the featured runner in a tough game script against an Eagles defense that is allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So it's a pretty light matchup here. DeAndre Swift ran all over them. The Vikings didn't really run all over the Eagles last night, but it wasn't really due to the defense being so great. It was really kind of just the game script there. And then you have J.D. McKissic here, who, like Nyheim Hines, if there was ever a week to start one of these guys, it would be this week, where he's going to be 6.5-point dogs against a high-scoring team in the Eagles. He put up 7 catches last week, had 13.3 fantasy points. He is a nice RB2 streamer, high-floor PPR guy. After that, we have the Raiders on the road in Tennessee as 2.5-point favorites with a 46.5-point over-under. Now, the Titans have been so bad this year. They have been bottom 5 in offense and defense per DVOA. Neither of these teams play that fast. The Raiders are going to want to throw. The Titans are going to want to run the ball. I think I agree with the line here, where it's not going to be the most exciting game. I would lean the under, and I think the Raiders just barely squeak it out. Now, when we talk about the fantasy players in this game, we have Josh Jacobs on the Raiders side of things, who I have as a start, despite a slow start here as RB32 on the season. The Raiders are 0-2. They played the Cardinals and the Chargers. They haven't had a light game script at this point yet, but the usage has been great. He's handled 18 of the 19 rush attempts last week. He owns all of the goal line work. The Titans are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. This is a game where Josh Jacobs should get his 15 to 20 rush attempts. If he gets on the goal line and he sneaks it in, I think if there was ever a week for Josh Jacobs to have his 15 points, it would be this week. Then we have Derrick Henry, who is the RB36. He's actually scoring less points than Josh Jacobs by now. And I know a lot of people were out there chirping me in the comments for saying Derrick Henry was a fade in the top 6 of fantasy drafts. I still had him as my 112. I had him at the 1-2 turn. I wasn't disrespecting him fully, but he's been rough at this point. He's averaging 3.1 yards per carry. It's not great. I guess this is a potential get-right spot here at home versus a Raiders run defense that is allowing the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. We'll see. It's just tough for a Titans team to ever get in a game script that favors Derrick Henry if they're never leading in games. I think that this is one of the more lighter matchups here, but they didn't lose to the Giants. We'll see. He's still getting his volume, so you have to play him there. You draft him in like the 1st or 2nd round. Derrick Henry, if you have him on your team, he has to be in your starting lineup, but it is definitely time to start panicking. Now, we have an absolute stinker after that, where we have the Texans on the road in Chicago. The Bears are 2.5-point favorites at home. The over-under is 40.5. This is going to be a really rough game script where the Bears are playing slow. They're running the ball. They've only passed the ball 28 times at this point. Where on the other side of things, the Texans aren't scoring a lot, but they're playing faster. They're throwing the ball more than expected. So you're going to have a weird spot here where there's not going to be a lot of scoring. Bears are going to want to hold on to the ball. Texans will probably have quick, like 3-and-out type drives. It's going to be pretty ugly. Now, when we talk about the Texans here with these quick 3-and-out drives, we have Dameon Pierce, who's actually moving the chains a ton last week. And I'll call him an RB2 streamer after a huge improvement from him last week. It's actually pretty interesting how much these rookies increase their playing time so quickly, where Garrett Wilson jumped from like 50% of the routes to like 75%. You have a guy like Dameon Pierce who went from a 30% snap share, 41% rush attempt share to a 63% snap share, 79% rush attempt share. So he's already now the clear 1A back. He's the between the tackles grinder. He should have the goal line looks. I like him against a Bears defense that ranks 3rd worst in PFF rush grade. He's like an RB30-ish option, RB2 streamer here, which naturally makes Rex Burkhead a sit for me. Even as road underdogs, I don't think this is the game script for Rex Burkhead, who went from 22 opportunities in week 1 to just 3 in week 2. He's a situational satellite back. He's a budget version of Nyheim Hines and McKissic, but because this is a game that doesn't have a high over-under, and because they're only like 2.5-point underdogs, for me, Rex Burkhead is a sit this week. On the other side, we have David Montgomery, who actually looked amazing last week. He had 120 yards on only like 15 attempts. He looked good. He's playing against the Texans, who are dead last in rush defense per PFF. This is a soft matchup as a home favorite on the NFL's most run-heavy offense. For me this week, David Montgomery is a firm RB2. Now, of course, with Khalil Herbert, he showed juice, but you still can't put him into starting lineups. He only saw 5 opportunities last week. Until David Montgomery goes down, or Khalil Herbert forces this into a 2-man committee where he's seeing 10-plus touches per week, Khalil Herbert should be on your bench. Then we have our last 1 p.m. game on the slate. We have the Bengals on the road versus the Jets. The Bengals are minus 4.5-point favorites. The over-under is 45.5. This is another game that I love the over in. Both teams rank 6th in neutral seconds per snap. So that's just like another like pace stat Me doing these on Tuesdays means I don't have a full arsenal of pace stats, but this is one that they have on RotoViz. 6 seconds per snap. They're playing fast. They're running a lot of plays. And this is a perfect bounce back spot for what has been a bad Bengals offense going up against DVOA's worst defense in the New York Jets. They just gave up 30-plus points to the Cleveland Browns. I think the Jets are also on the other side of that. They're going to rally in garbage time, score points as well. I like this game to get into like the 50s in terms of total points. I like the Bengals to probably win here like, I don't know, like 30, like 31, 35 to somewhere probably like 21, 24 for the Jets. I do think that we can see this game get into like the 50s, 60s range. We'll see. But I do think that this is a great spot for the Bengals to just get their offense to click against a Jets defense that has been somewhat strong, but on paper they have been allowing a lot of points. Now, when we talk about the Bengals and their running backs, all we have is Joe Mixon here, who still was the bell cow on this offense. He still hovered around 75% of the snaps despite a down game last weekend. But I would still call him a firm RB1 this week versus a Jets run D that is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Then we have the Jets running backs, and I would still call both of these guys, Michael Carter and Breece Hall, RB2 streamers. Carter is the RB16 on the season. He's playing a majority of the snaps as the 1A back here. And then you have Breece Hall as the RB24 on the season. Both of these guys are top 24 running backs so far, showing a lot of efficiency on the ground. Now, this became a three-way backfield this weekend where Ty Johnson had a lot of the looks in the passing game that should have gone to Breece Hall. But Breece Hall has been so efficient and so explosive on the ground. I do think he's going to force their hand a little bit to give him those touches back and then maybe even eat into Michael Carter's touches very soon here. So I would call Cincinnati a neutral matchup. They should be having a lot of plays here, running a lot of offense, playing from behind, a lot of dump-off opportunities with Joe Flacco. As much as I love what I saw from Joe Flacco last week, I don't think he's going to be able to keep up a 10.5-point ADOT after we saw in Week 1. So both of these guys, even still, with this being a three-man rotation last week, I still like both Jets running backs as RB2 streamers. Which then brings us to the 4 p.m. games. We have the Jaguars on the road as 7-point underdogs to the Chargers. The over-under is 47.5. And the Jaguars have looked good. They're about middle of the road in pass rate and pace. But they're going on the road after 2 light matchups of the Colts and the Commanders into a buzzsaw of a defense in the Chargers defense. They have playmakers everywhere. They have Asante Samuel Jr. I believe they have J.C. Jackson, Bosa, Derwin James. It's going to be a long day. So I think they're going to struggle. I think the Chargers are going to really, really lay it on them, where the Chargers play with pace and they pass the ball a ton. So they're going to pass the ball, run as many plays as possible, get up early here, and challenge the Jaguars to try and keep up with them. If they can keep up with them, probably not, but they're going to at least put them in a position where they're going to have to try. Now, when we talk about the Jaguars playmakers, we have James Robinson up top, who saw 23 carries last week. But I want to remind everybody that was in a 24-0 win. Much different game script here when we're talking about the Jaguars on the road at the Chargers' place, where the Chargers are favored by a touchdown. So he should still be the 1A in this backfield, get a majority of the touches, but I would pump the brakes on, just crowning him a top 24 running back after last week. I think in this matchup, he's more of an RB2 streamer, but I would have him in that RB25, RB30 area. Now, just like McKissick and just like Nyheim Hines, if there was ever a game script for you to play ETN and for him to thrive, it would be this one. Even as much as James Robinson has taken opportunities away from Travis Etienne is still firmly the 2-minute drill back and the 3rd down and distance back, which means in a game script like this, he is a situational RB2 streamer in PPR formats in that RB30 to RB35 area. Now, of course, with the Chargers, we're starting Austin Eckler. Thankfully, his route participation went from 37% to 60%, that elite area we're looking for. He saw 24 opportunities last week. He's a firm RB1 at home as big favorites. Then we have another stinker in the low 40s. We have the Falcons on the road as 1.5-point underdogs to the Seahawks. Both these teams are bottom 10 in neutral pace. They're also bottom 10 in defensive DVOA. Neither of them really have good defenses. I think both of them, the Seahawks aren't great on offense. The Falcons are a little bit better. I think they're going to be able to move the ball on each other, but it's going to be a slow pace. It should be like an ugly matchup where, I don't know, maybe the Falcons win like 21-14 or like 17-14. I think that's the kind of game we're looking at. And when we talk about how that affects the Falcons running backs, we have Cordell Patterson here, who came crashing down to earth after a 20-point game. He gives his owners under 5 points last week. Now, he does get a better matchup here where he's going up against a bottom 10 defense on the road in the Seahawks. I would have him somewhere in that RB25 to RB30 area. And then we also have Tyler Algier, who is interesting. He saw 10 attempts last week, but that's still not enough volume within this offense for him to be an RB2 streamer. I would have him as a pretty desperate RB2 play, somewhere in the area of like RB45 this week, just given that he hasn't earned a ton of volume yet, and given that this is going to be a low-scoring game. On the other side, we have just an absolute ugly committee here where this is a three-way split. Last week, we had Travis Homer lead this running back room in snaps at 45% of the snaps, yet he still had 0 opportunities. So you have Travis Homer clogging up a bunch of snaps, not getting any looks, and then you have Rashad Penny with 7 opportunities, Kenneth Walker with 7. This is really, really ugly. Now, we'll have a better game script here where the Seahawks were trailing all game last week, and they now have a setup here where they are playing against a bottom 5 rush DVOA defense in the Falcons. It should be a little bit more conducive to running the ball. Just because of that and the fact that they're at home, I would have Penny as just barely an RB2 streamer here. He's still the 1A in quotes to Kenneth Walker, but Kenneth Walker is right there. Now, the issue is that Kenneth Walker, even though that he's earning volume here and he's mixing into this committee, because it's a three-way split on a team that doesn't run a ton of plays and on a team that doesn't score a ton of points, it's ugly. So just given the fact that he's third in this running back committee, just because Travis Homer is out there on all passing downs, Kenneth Walker is not startable just yet. Then we have a shocking line here that is the Packers on the road as 2.5-point underdogs to the Buccaneers, and the over-under is only 41.5. That is only 1 point more than that Seahawks-Falcons game. And it feels weird because you have Brady versus Rodgers. This feels like it should be a shootout. But when you dig deeper, it makes some sense, where these are both bottom 15 scoring offenses. They're bottom 8 in pace. All of this points to it being low scoring on top of the Buccaneers having a top 5 defense. I could see this being ugly, but I could also see this being a crazy, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers shootout. We'll see. I think it has upside for a shootout, but I will be honest. I think in the median, you should project this game to be a little bit uglier than you would hope. Now, when we talk about the Buccaneers running backs, we have Fournette up top, and as a home favorite against a soft Green Bay run D that just let the Bears run crazy on them, 180 yards, 6.7 yards per carry. I think Leonard Fournette has a really good day here. And then we have the Packers running backs that are a little bit less clear of smash starts, where you have a 50-50 split here, where Aaron Jones is the passing down back, A.J. Dillon is the between the tackles grinder, and on paper, people see this Tampa Bay run defense as really strong, but it's been weaker than it's been in years past, where, yes, they're allowing the third least fantasy points to opposing running backs, but they've only played Zeke, Pollard, and Mark Ingram so far. When you look a little bit deeper and you go into Football Outsiders, rush DVOA defense, they're 15th there, but they're first in passing defense. So that might actually set up a funnel where if the Packers can't get anything going with Allen Lazard and like Romeo Doubs and all of their receiving group, they might just focus on the run, see if Tampa Bay can stop them between the tackles. And with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, they might not be able to. If you're giving up 6.7 yards per carry to David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert and Justin Fields, I think Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are in a good spot here. But again, it's a low-scoring game. It might shoot out, but because the over-under is at 41.5, you can't project it to be a high-scoring game. So with that being said, I'll have Aaron Jones as a mid-RB2. He's a start for me. A.J. Dillon's also a start for me as a back-end RB2. After that, we have the Rams at the Cardinals. The Rams are 4-point favorites on the road. The over-under is 50.5, and these two played twice last year. Both of those matchups cleared 50 points. This should be a high-scoring game. I do lean the under, though, just given how good the Rams' defense has been. Now, when we talk about the Rams, it's been a weird split here, where Henderson out the gate was the bell cow, and then it was a 55-45 split in terms of the snaps in a blink of the eye. Darrell Henderson's still my preferred guy here. He was the lead back. He dominated the goal line carries, and he dominated the passing down work. Those are the two areas of football or of running back backfields that we care about. I would call him an RB2 streamer in a neutral matchup versus a Cardinals run defense. There should be enough points here for him to have 10 to 15 touches and possibly a touchdown. Now with Cam Akers, I don't think you can start him just yet. He did out-touch Henderson last week, but most of his volume were low value between the 20s touches. And for that reason, I would bench him for now. But if you're desperate and you're looking at like Kenneth Gainwell, Mark Ingram, Rex Burkhead, at that point, I would play Cam Akers. Now, things are a little bit more tricky on the other side of this game with the Cardinals running backs, where James Conner left last week's game with an injury, but it seems like he's on track to play this week. If you play him, he's a must start just based on volume alone, based on this being a 50-plus point total, but it doesn't feel great. He faces the best run defense in the league. The Rams have Aaron Donald. They have Bobby Wagner. It's going to be tough to be efficient, but on volume alone, he is probably a high-end RB2 this week. Now, there is a chance that James Conner sits. If James Conner starts, we're sitting Darrell Williams, we're sitting Eno Benjamin, but if James Conner sits, I like both Eno Benjamin and Darrell Williams as RB2 streamers. We really don't know at this point who is the main back when James Conner goes down. We have week 1 data where Eno Benjamin was the clear RB2, and then we have week 3 data where Darrell Williams was the clear 1A to Eno Benjamin's 1B once Conner went down. So we don't have a firm read on this split, but if Conner isn't ready to go, I would have both of these guys right on the fringe of RB2 streaming options in that like RB35, RB40 area. Which then brings us to the Sunday night game here. We have the 49ers as 1-point favorites on the road versus the Broncos. There's a 44.5 point over-under in this one. This is 2 bottom 6 teams in neutral pace. It's going to be a slow game. Thankfully, though, both of these offenses can still be efficient within that environment. And when we talk about the 49ers running backs, we have Jeff Wilson up top, and Trey Lance's injury and Ty Davis Price's injury opens up a lot more volume for Jeff Wilson in the run game, who already saw 20 touches last week. The Broncos defense is tough, though. They're allowing the least amount of fantasy points to opposing running backs. They're a really solid defense, but Wilson should still see 15-plus carries at the absolute lowest. So for that reason, he's a fringe RB2. I would be starting him if I had him. Now, we'll also talk about Jordan Mason here, who is a hot waiver wire ad this week just because of the Ty Davis Price injury, the Elijah Mitchell injury, of course. But with Jordan Mason, you're not starting him until we see what he looks like in an NFL game. This is a guy with 0 NFL carries at this point. He is the RB2 on the depth chart, but how much does that actually mean? Marlon Mack got called up from the practice squad. What is really going on with this backfield? We won't know, but if Jordan Mason comes out here and has like 15 carries this week and challenges Jeff Wilson, then he'll be interesting moving forward. Next, we have the Broncos here, and Javonte Williams disappointed last week where he only scored less than 10 points versus the Texans, but his usage was amazing. He saw a 65-35 snap split with Melvin Gordon. He out-touched him across the board. All really good stuff. He also dominated the goal line looks, which was huge after he fumbled in the Monday night game before that. In this matchup, I like Javonte as a back-end RB1 just based off volume alone. It's also a tough matchup here versus a top 5 defense in San Francisco. Then we have Melvin Gordon, who is currently RB45 on the year, but he is still seeing double-digit touches in each of his first 2 games. So for that reason alone, just based off volume, I would have him as a fringe RB2 streamer right around that like RB35 area. I wouldn't love to play him, but if you have to, he is a startable option. Then our last game here, the Monday Night Football game, which I think it's too late for them to flex it, dude, but I wish that they could, man. Cowboys at Giants. Giants are minus 2.5 point favorites. The over-under is 39.5. It's literally as ugly as the Thursday night game. These are 2 teams that are running fast-paced offenses where they're top 12 in neutral pace, but they're bottom 10 in pass rate over expectation. So they're running the ball, but they're also calling a lot of plays. So that is good for the environment, but I don't think we're going to see a ton of points here. Neither team is really strong against the run, but these are both offenses that aren't, pumping out like 30-plus point games. So I think you're looking at like a 24-17 type game here with a 100-yard rusher on the winning team. And we talk about the underdogs here, the Cowboys. We have Zeke Elliott up top, who now has 2 straight games of under 6 points, but he's also seen 12 opportunities in week 1, 17 opportunities in week 2. That's just enough volume to be in that RB30 to RB35 area. For that reason, I would call Zeke Elliott an RB2 streamer. Then we have Tony Pollard, who I'll also call an RB2 streamer, but he's also right on the fringe there. I'd have him right around that like top 36 running back area. The issue for me with Tony Pollard is, yes, he had a great game. He scored 19.8 points. He had a 24% target share. The issue is that he had a 54% target per out run, which isn't sustainable. They're not running him on enough of routes. And I think it is just kind of Kellen Moore's incompetence. I don't know why he doesn't understand that he could either just have Pollard in the slot sometimes with Zeke Elliott in the backfield, kind of like they do with Aaron Jones, where Aaron Jones, even splitting things 50-50 with Zeke Elliott, is still out there on 65% of the routes. Tony Pollard, despite being probably their most electric playmaker, not named CeeDee Lamb, is only out there on 35% of the routes. That number has to be in the 60% plus range for that target share of 24% to be sustainable. We'll see if they start to crank it up. I mean, they just released Dennis Houston. All they really have out there is Noah Brown. Maybe very soon they will crank it up for Tony Pollard, but until then, he's right on the fringes. I do think this is a light enough matchup, and he's coming off of a big game that I would put him as an RB2 streamer, but again, very fringe. Then we have Saquon Barkley, who had a quiet game last week, only 11.8 points, but he's still getting treated like a bell cow in this offense. 25 combined targets and carries, just based off of that volume in what I would call a neutral matchup at home. He's a top 3 running back for me this week against the Cowboys. Now, that's going to do it for us today, fellas. Again, as always, if you want to know exactly how I rank these running backs, you have like an RB2 streamer and an RB2 streamer, which one should I play? That'll be on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart, where I come out with my weekly rankings every Thursday before the Thursday night games. So you guys have the best rankings for start-sit decisions in fantasy football. And then we also do a Sunday morning Patreon-only live stream where I go through, help everybody out with start-sit decisions before game start, but late enough so that we get all of the information we need to set solid lineups. So again, if you want to make sure you're out there crushing your start-sit decisions, check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be down below in the description. It'll be down below in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice. Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena. From misdemeanors, dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a